Hi all, welcome to the Bible study for this week. It is going to be a blast. As you can see, we are prepping for Sunday, July 25th, Christmas in July. Yes, little calendars in front of you may say something about proper 12, year B, etc., etc. But we're not doing that. We're doing Christmas in July instead because it's so much more fun. And Jesus talks about bread all the time this summer. So we can skip one Sunday about bread and come back to it later. It'll be fun. This week, we are going to be looking at three texts. They are all going to sound very familiar to you if you have ever in your entire life been to a Christmas Eve service. They are Isaiah chapter 9, verses 2 through 7. Psalm number 96, and the birth story from Luke chapter 2. So if you want to open up your Bibles and join us, we're going to kick off here with Isaiah chapter 9. Pastor Rebecca, let's hear what you've got.
Isaiah chapter 9 brings all kinds of ideas and very, very familiar. And because I'm a little bit odd, when I look at 9, the first thing I think of are the 4 land territories of Israel and historical geography of the Bible, because I cannot understand Isaiah 9 unless I step back into historical geography of Israel. It's behind most of the things we read in the Old Testament. Therefore, Israel is this long country, about 150 miles or so long, changed over time, about 50 miles wide. You can't go this way. You can walk all along the seacoast from the south to the north, as the Egyptians did as they were passing through to Asia and Europe. You can go down the Shephelah, which is the wonderful farming territory, richest stuff on earth, or you can go very difficultly up through the hill country. That's where most of the major cities are. Or you could go down the Great Rift Valley, which is below sea level. Even the Sea of Galilee is below sea level. And of course, to the Great Salt Sea, the lowest area on earth. Israel is composed of these 4 great territories, and there are 2 pathways that go along them. One that the armies of the world would take because it went not too far from the sea, called the Way of the Sea. This is good. And it went through the richest farming territory on earth. So if you're a hungry soldier going from Asia or Europe down to Egypt, or the other way around, you go up through the Way of the Sea. And when you get to that farming territory, you take what you need for your soldiers. How does that help when you hear the following verses? Chapter 9 of Isaiah, verses 2 through 7. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulder, the rod of their oppression, you broke on the day of Midian. For all the boots of the tramping warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Got it?
Got it.
Cool. Who are the people who walked in darkness? What does it mean, the yoke of their burden? How come we've got tramping warriors in this gorgeous prophecy? Well, series of prophecies put together. There's actually 3, starting in verse 7. We've got 3 children born, one in chapter 7. In chapter 7, we've got the young woman giving birth to the child Emmanuel. In chapter 8, we've got the birth of the prophet's wife, Mahershala Hashbaz. And in chapter 9, we have this child who is born for us. They're all of a part here. So, but we'll stay with this one. When most of us hear this, we think about Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince, and Handel. 17th century music goes through our head. I cannot read this without hearing Handel in my head. But Jules, I can't sing it like you could. I should have asked you to do this. But Handel is there. But this wasn't written in the mid-17th century of the Common Era. This was written more like 750 BCE, before the Common Era. And it helps a little bit to know that the opening verse of this, of chapter 9, verse 1, there will be no gloom for those who were in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. In the latter time, he will make glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond Jordan, the Galilee of the Gentiles. Does that solve it for you? It solves it for me because of the historical geography of the Bible. Remember those two great roadways that go through Israel? One goes near the sea. Oh, I didn't tell you about the one on the other side. It's in the Transjordanian highlands. It's called the Way of the Kings. But we're going to stay on the Way of the Sea because that goes through the rich farming territory. And the armies of the world like to eat, and there's really good food along the way. If you lived in Israel, in the rich part, anywhere near the Jezreel Valley, that's just north of Mount Carmel, you're in the richest farming territory on earth. You can eat anything. If you live there, you're fat and happy, oh, except when the soldiers come through, then they tend to kill you and take all of the produce. And if you live in the walled cities, that's up in the hill country, you've got more of a chance of survival, except that in Israel, there are lots of tells. A tell is a destroyed city that the people built on top of, and then it was a destroyed city that the people built on top of, and then it was a destroyed. The armies of the world tended to destroy you and take everything, all of your property, and when the Assyrians found you, they put salt in the land too, so nothing could grow. Very dumb of them. It was a disaster. The Way of the Sea spelled disaster for Zebulun and Naphtali. If the armies weren't marching through, you were doing great. But when they did, there were all kinds of problems. And oh, by the way, up in the hill country, there was a little town kind of nestled in the mountains there called Nazareth. And there was a woman there who got a visit from the angel Gabriel. And there was a fellow called Jesus who came back from Egypt and lived there in that town. And the people who lived by the Way of the Sea in Zebulun and Naphtali have seen a great light. From the time of the two exiles, through the times, if you want to hear about them, read Nehemiah and Ezra, through the times of the minor prophets and terrible stuff, the light shone in Bethlehem, but the child grew up in Nazareth, in the territory of Zebulun, and those who walked in great darkness have seen a great light. The light for all nations, all people, at all times. I love historical geography.
It's so important. It means that everything makes more sense.
Thank you. For me, it does. But
Yeah.
Handel is still running through my head. I cannot lose Handel, but he's great, so why lose Handel?
Maybe Handel knew the historical geography too.
Thank you. I will assume that.
Yeah, we can just assume that.
Luther did.
Yeah, exactly, right?
There's a side note on my Bible that talks about being co-yoked. For the bar, for the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders has been broken. But then you get this beautiful image from Philippians chapter 3, verse 21, where there is a co-yoking with Christ.
Ah.
And I love that imagery because I think, again, it's like that. We as siblings in Christ are called to walk alongside each other, to lift each other's despair, to bring joy together. It's not ahead or behind, it's alongside. I like that co-yoking kind of imagery.
Once it was the bar that destroyed, and now it's the yoking and support of the Christ.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. Disagree with itself as much times as it wants. That's how it goes. Thanks, Pastor Rebecca. Jules, do you have Psalm 96 ready to roll?
I do have Psalm 96, and this is going to sound incredibly familiar to you, especially because there are a bunch of songs that I believe have been written on this song. I think Michael W. Smith is probably the author of one or two of them. But Psalm 96 reads, excuse me, my allergies are kind of, it's windy and a little dry in Minnesota right now. Oh, sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord all the hills. Sing to the Lord, bless his name. Tell of his salvation from day to day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous work among all peoples. For great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. He is to be revered above all gods, for all the gods of the people are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Honor and majesty are before him. Strength and beauty are his sanctuary. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of the peoples. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Bring an offering and come into his courts. That reminds me of how we say offering is an act of worship. You know, that idea of when we share our gifts, when we share our times, when we share our tithes and our talents, that is actually like an act of worship. Worship the Lord in the holy splendor, tremble before him all the earth. Say among the nations, the Lord is king, the world is firmly established, it shall never be moved. He will judge the prophets with equity. Let the heavens be glad, let the earth rejoice, let the sea roar, and all that fills it, let the field exult and everything in it. Then shall the trees of the forest sing for joy before the Lord, for he is coming to judge the earth. He will judge the world with righteousness and the peoples with his truth. Word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
All right. So Psalm 96 obviously is the 96th Psalm of the book of Psalms. It's a hymn. Sing a new song to the Lord is known as a cantante domino. That's just a little bit of Latin for those of you who know Latin, and I don't. So we're going to roll on to a little bit of the background and the theme. So according to Radek, this psalm was composed by David when he brought the Ark of the Covenant up to Jerusalem. On this day, David composed two songs, Who Do, Sing to the Lord, the Entire Earth. So Psalm 96 was sung before the Ark every afternoon until the time the temple was constructed and the Ark was moved into it. In Hebrew, the psalm is known as Shiru Lashem. Did I say that correctly?
I'd have to see it in Hebrew. I'm trying to find it quickly.
Okay, it means sing to the Lord, and repeats the word sing 3 times.
Yeah, yes, it does. Gorgeous.
Shiru Lashem, according to the Midrash. Say again?
Very good.
Excellent. According to the Midrash, these 3 instances allude to the 3 daily prayer services when Israel sings praises to the Lord. They are, and again, I feel like I should share this with you, Rebecca, so you can say it right. Shakarit, the morning prayer.
Shakrit is I've heard, but where are you? Which verse?
Verse 1, sing to the Lord a new song. And then Minchka, the afternoon prayer.
Okay, let's just take it because I'm not finding it quickly. The numbering, of course, is different.
Yeah, okay. And then Maariv. Ma'ariv.
Ma'arit, yeah. Putting Hebrew into English is just a nightmare. It doesn't quite go. So whatever you got is right.
The point is, this is a song that you can sing morning, noon, and night.
Mm-hmm.
In Christian scholarship, according to one of the commentaries that I read, this is known as like a missionary hymn, which is paired with this idea of the hard-heartedness, that's one of my favorite. I love that people have like hard-heartedness. We need to be like broken open and let God be God and let us be God's children, and let's stop being so stiff-necked people and so hard-hearted. I love this psalm, and I don't know if I would call it one of my all-time favorites, but I always think of like Great is the Lord by Michael W. Smith. I'm obviously a product of the 80s, some bad Christian music among that, but I love that song because it is sort of triumphant. So anything to add with that from the Hebrew? I can see you like pulling out your Hebrew like scrolls, Rebecca, and unfurling them, trying to catch up with what I was talking about.
Right. Unfortunately, it's got more than one verse to this psalm, and I go slowly. One little aside, Hebrew was written on scrolls. Once we started into the Greek, that was written in book form, codexes. So you're right about the scrolls, but of course you're almost always right. And we don't understand about the pronunciation. Remember my buddy, the Masoretes? They reinserted the vowels.
Yep.
We don't have them for about a millennia. So it was just kind of memory as to how all of this was pronounced. So thank you for your confidence, but I need specific verses to go find the thing. And even then, the Masoretes dictated. So we have their pronunciation.
And for more information on that, you can go back to last week's Bible study for a deep dive into Hebrew scholarship and Greek translations and all the rest. Is there a specific thing that popped out to you when you heard that psalm read that resonated with either one of you? Because I always think about the Psalms as Lectio Divina, that idea of is there a word or something that stands up and shimmers to you when you read the Psalms, either on your own or when you hear them read?
Well, when you read it, sing is an imperative, and repeat it, as you said, and every time you have the repetitions, now sing, this is monumental.
Sing, and I think it's interesting to connect that with the Ark of the Covenant and how they would sing this psalm there. That's where God lives, right? The Ark of the Covenant.
That's in God's chamber. Yeah, it's in the Holy of Holies. Mm-hmm.
Well,
the more of that you can look it up.
And exciting singing this Sunday, because we'll get to pull out some of the good carols and hymns that we all love and only get to do a few times a year. So thank you.
We'll follow the command to sing.
Yes, absolutely. With jubilance. Our gospel for this Sunday is from Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 20. It will sound familiar to you, I am sure. So Luke chapter 2, the birth of Jesus. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was emperor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged, and who was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in bands of cloth, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. In that region, there were shepherds living in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for I am bringing you good news of great joy for all the people. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord. And this will be a sign for you. You will find a child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favors." When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go now to Bethlehem and see this thing that has taken place, which the Lord has made known to us." So they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in the manger. And when they saw this, they made known what had been told them about this child, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured all these words and pondered them in her heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had seen and heard as it had been told them. The gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
I love this text. It's so much fun. I'm really excited that we're doing Christmas in July again. It's just a blast. I feel like when we do Christmas Eve worship, we get so wrapped up in the pageantry, like sometimes literally the pageantry of the night and the family and the food and the gifts and the season and the snow and the storms and all that fun stuff, that we kind of like just roll right through these texts and don't get to pay a lot of attention to them, because it's like, this is the story that we've heard and there are 400 kids sitting in the pew with us, and so we're trying to keep track of them and give them snacks and doing all of these things, and so we don't get a chance to like sit and dwell with these texts for as much time as we might get to sit and dwell with texts when we're slightly less distracted by the things happening in the world around us. So that's one of the reasons that I love doing Christmas in July, because I think that it allows us to sit in these texts in a way that we don't usually get to sit within them. And I will be honest with you and say that I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to do with the sermon part of worship on Sunday, because I've been very excited about the rest of the service, which is a lot of fun. But I've been thinking about this question that I think comes up a lot during the actual Christmas season, which is what happens when Christmas is over? Like when we have to take down the lights and throw away the wrapping paper, and we're snacking on a fridge full of leftovers, and we've done all of this celebrating and we've done all this waiting through Advent that led to this big, huge, wonderful worship service, and then everything is over and it's January and the world still kind of sucks. Like, what do we do when Christmas is over? After we spent all this time talking about this Christ child who's going to come and right side up the world, but the world has not yet been right side upped. But we're in a new year and Christmas is behind us, and so like we don't get the chance to reflect on what it means that Christmas is over, and yet the promises made in Advent aren't yet fulfilled in a way that we would expect them to. And so I think that it's a wonderful thing to reflect on the Christmas story in July and be reminded that the Christmas story isn't over. Like, it doesn't just end on December 25th or on Epiphany on January 6th, right? It doesn't end when the Christmas season ends. It continues and it continues and continues. And so what I have today for you is just kind of a random array of thoughts about bits and pieces of this text, and I'm hoping that Pastors Jules and Rebecca will jump in with their random array of thoughts about the Christmas text as well. But that was the first one, this idea that Christmas is not over because the world has not yet been right side upped, and the promises that we hear in Advent and Christmas have not yet been fulfilled. The next one comes from one of my favorite authors, his name is Richard Swanson, and he's a pastor at Augustana, or a professor at Augustana, and you've heard me talk about him before. But he asks these weird and wonderful questions that I think help me look at these texts in new ways. And one of the things that he reflected on in his book, Provoking the Gospel, was about the angels and the heavenly host, and what that means and what that looks like, and how that compares to the realities of the day that this was being written, which, like, a reminder that this was being written when the people were under Roman occupation, right? Like, Jesus's birth narrative takes place under the rule of Romans in the midst of a sometimes really horrifying Roman occupation, set when Emperor Augustus, who was emperor of Rome, and ruled over the people with the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, which was peace, but peace in such a way that, like, peace through swords, like peace, but only if you listen to what I have to say and follow all the rules. If you don't listen to what I say and follow all the rules, then peace is a little bit more like crucifixion. So, that kind of peace. And so the people are expecting this revolution, and there is God acting in a different way, in an unexpected way, in the birth of Jesus, and God made flesh, and Emmanuel, and God with us. And so you have this unexpected entry into the story of who the Messiah is. But the Messiah is announced and the story is reflected in so many of the ways that we would talk about the emperor, right? Like the emperor was considered this godhead figure, and was announced and talked about as a god. And the birthday of Emperor Augustus was the new year, because it was so important and it restarted everything for the year. And every time his birthday came around and the new year was started, he was announced with trumpets, and that this new birth and this new life was coming into the world and radically changing things. And so we have, instead of the trumpets of soldiers, we have the angels appearing in the heavens. And it's a reminder that angels are not adorable babies in diapers, right? Angels are the host of God, and the host of God is a weird churchy word that we use that actually is the army of God. I mean, and so what Richard Swanson talks about is like, this is the armed military might of God. Which I know we try to get away from some of that language, Pastor Jules, but like to think about it as like, this is a terrifying prospect, and sets up the announcement of the birth of Christ over and against the announcements of the yearly birthday of Caesar Augustus. And that is intentional, and that's important, because context is important, as Pastor Becker reminds us again and again and again, right? But then we get this call back to that original idea, right? Like, if God can send the host of heaven, which is not like, I mean, we don't know how many it is, but when you talk about a host, you're talking about like a battalion, right? Like, it's a fair few. Like, this is not like 10. This is probably like hundreds, right? Like in imagery, like when you're thinking about this would be a frightening concept. There is a reason that the shepherds have fallen over and are afraid, and that the angel has to tell them to not be afraid. And I imagine many of the shepherds saying, no, I think there's a good reason to be afraid right now, right? This is an imposing instance in their lives. And yet, so God has control over the hosts of heaven. They're coming, they're speaking this truth and this good news, right, into the world. And yet there's still poverty. And yet there's still injustice. And yet at that point in time, the people are literally still under the rule of Rome. So like, what's going on? Where's the disconnect here? Why is it that God has this host of angels that he can send to announce the birth of a baby, but can't seem to overthrow the occupying force of Rome? And that has nothing to do with what I would usually preach on. It's just something that Dr. Swanson asked, and now I can't get it out of my head, because I'm like, what? I mean, this is the idea, right? When Christmas is not over, like sometimes when Christmas is over, like things still suck. And why do things still suck? And what is the role of right side upping the world that we are a part of as this Christmas people that persists again and again and again and again? Yeah, so that's the angel bit that I was thinking about with this particular text. The other side of the angel part is that when we look at that word, it means messenger, right? Literally the translation is messenger of God. But they just talk to the shepherds, and then the shepherds become the messengers of God to everybody else, which I had never thought about before until like yesterday when I was reading an article. And I was like, that is fascinating. Like the way that we lift up the shepherds in that moment of like having them become that mouthpiece of God for the rest of the people who are in the story, right? And coming to Mary and Joseph and speaking these words, which Mary, of course, then ponders in her heart. So that was that part of it that I enjoyed. The other part of it is the no room for them in the inn, which the word here is the kataluma, which the other time that kataluma is used within the Gospels will also sound familiar to you, and that is the upper room that Jesus and his disciples go and take their Passover feast, their Last Supper in. It is there's no room in the guest house, the guest room of this particular building, so you're going to have to stay downstairs, not separate, not away from, because if there actually was a giant census happening, like being separate and away from everyone was not going to happen. I mean, we're talking about a lot of people showing up in town. Like there's no separate and away from in this. And so all those images that we see of the nativity, of it just being like Mary and Joseph and the baby and some animals and maybe a couple of shepherds off to the side, far less likely than it would be Mary and Joseph and maybe some animals and maybe a manger, because it would be a nice place to lay a kid down. And then also like 40 or 50 other people who also happen to be there for the census and didn't have a place to stay either, and were probably off to the side, you know, having some wine and hanging out, because as much as we sing Silent Night, we can be pretty assured that Jesus was crying a lot and a new baby was loud, and that's just how it was going to be. So those are a couple things that I've been thinking about with this particular text, and I think that it's kind of fun. What do you think about when you think about this text that we don't usually get to preach about on Christmas Eve?
Man, I could just hang out with what you had to say for a while. I mean, that'd take a little bit of brain time. I think the image that I like was that connection with the upper room in the Last Supper, that Greek word. I think that's just interesting. I love it when we have words like schizo, where you get like the baptism of Christ and then the curtain tearing, and then you have like this word that shows this amazing gift that we've been given, and then you can connect it with like the Lord's Supper with, hey, take and eat. This is my body given for you. This is my blood shed for you. This idea of connecting these two words with these two extraordinary events, one which is incarnation, and then that incarnation becomes a part of who we are, and we are reminded that we are these forgiven children. So that's where my mind went when you were talking about the C word. Say it again.
K, Cataluma.
Oh, Cataluma, K.
Cataluma. Yeah.
I really appreciated your expectations. What the people were expecting in a Messiah completely messed up the recognition of the Christ when he came. The prophecy we just talked about in Isaiah was 750 years or so in its fulfillment. And then what have you got? This weak little baby, not what that wonderful counselor, mighty God, Prince. It was the expectations that constantly were getting dashed. After the second exile and the Babylonians, even when Cyrus let the folks back, was to a damaged, devastated, poor, hard to eke out a living land, with lots of enemies already reassembled there to live among. It wasn't easy. It was tough stuff. So where is Isaiah's prophecy? That was hard. Yeah. Many folks were looking for the army to come and wipe down the fortresses of the Romans and take over. That's not what Jesus did.
No, and there's that subversive reality to the Christian message that God does not come into the world and take it over through violence, but with this revolution of love, which Bishop Michael Curry of the Episcopal Church talks about a lot. That revolution of love is the message of Christianity. And I think that was subversive and unexpected then, and it continues to be now. Especially as we talk about the right side upping of the world, like where are the prophecies being fulfilled? How is God continuing to break into the world and the kingdom of God continuing to come forth and be a presence in the world and part of the world, and the incarnate God continuing to be in the world, in, with, under, through us. Yeah, I don't know. I think that there are a lot of reasons that I don't get to talk about this stuff on my average Christmas Eve sermon.
Our expectations would have made it very difficult. Our in the general sense.
Yeah, the greater hour, right? Yeah. Yeah, and it's, I don't know, there's so much to this story that is not pretty, and doesn't fit in well with candlelight and midnight masses right before we open up presents on Christmas Eve, sort of thing. I mean, we've talked about it before as part of this study, the oddity of the imagery of Mary, that is historical and modern imagery of Mary as this perfect, demure woman whose hair is not out of place and whose gowns are not stained with breast milk, and whose does not have a placenta laying in the straw next to her. Like, what are the realities of birth that get skipped over for the sake of this perfection imagery that we try to put forth? What messiness do we ignore for the sake of some sort of weird purity culture that leads to us having to have things be presented perfectly, when not a bit of our history as a people of faith is anything close to perfect and cleaned up in any way, shape, or form. Where's that messiness that we get to, I mean, that's on display here in ways that we could talk about and take example from, as opposed to pushing to the side. Because the other side of this text is that, like, there is, I mean, the time came for her to give birth and he was born, right? Like, that's it. Like, the birth part of this, the Jesus part of this, is like a half a sentence. The vast majority of these 20 verses are the supporting characters. Like Jesus plays a very small part in this text. We talk about him a lot, but he plays a very small part in this text. It's everybody else that has a line. It's everybody else that has something to do and something to say and some way to be a part of the story, which I take so much encouragement from, because if the plan is that a baby is going to fix it, the plan is going to fail. But if the plan is that the people who have been gathered can help right side up the world, then maybe we have a chance at this, right? Inspired by the baby who grew up and taught and preached and lived and healed and died and rose again. Absolutely. But the plan can't center on the baby. The plan has to center on the rest of the cast as well, to be there and be a part of what God is up to in the world, which I think is hopeful, even if after Christmas things still sometimes kind of suck.
I took my lights down just to
I see that.
land that.
I'll still encourage you to wear your Christmas sweaters and come to have some fun and all of that as well on Sunday, because it was hard this last year to not be able to do Christmas in person. I mean, we did our little outdoor Christmas Eve shindig where it was 30 below zero, and still you all came for some strange reason that I will never understand. It is 30 below zero. You stay home when it's 30 below zero. I should have known. But it'll be nice to be able to gather and sing some carols and worship together this year, even if it's in a slightly different month of the year than we usually do it. So
I'm reminded of a saint that is now residing in a different space, S. Jean Eckern, who would say, "More Christmas carols during the summer."
We'll probably sing Good King Wenceslas.
Oh, I'm sure.
At some point.
Joy to the World.
My favorites. All right, we can leave it there. But let us know what you're thinking about. What sticks out to you from these texts, any of these texts that we don't usually get to spend much time on, because even when we do Bible study on these texts, that's still the week before Easter, or before Christmas, and we are probably preoccupied. And so what are the things that stick out from you from these texts? What what's going to resonate with you on a Sunday morning when you hear this outside of our usual time of year?
I would add one other thing that came from the previous Bible study. So if you haven't watched it, go back 1 week. But that idea of the shepherds smelling like the sheep,
Oh,
yet they're the mouthpiece of the good news.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that little thread that kind of rolls through there. That's cool.
Go back and listen to that, though, because Pastor Rebecca has a wonderful story about the smell of the shepherd that you should definitely take a look at.
And there's the name of a book.
Yes. So, all right. So yeah, please join us this Sunday worship at 9 o'clock, either virtually or in person. We'd love to have you. And what else is going on this Sunday? Also, for announcements, is our last Jazz in July concert, which is going to be a blast. So Dwayne Tannehill and company will be playing. And in addition to that, we'll have some food trucks and the schoolie bus, and we'll be collecting money for both Habitat and Sawashko Cares, South Washington County Cares, one of our partner organizations. So come and support that as well. There'll be games and music and stuff for people of all ages out there. I think there's a fire truck. Isn't there a fire truck coming?
I think there's a fire truck.
Like that?
Maybe an ambulance too.
It's going to be very exciting. So come and be a part of that. We'd love to have you. Invite some friends. And if you are watching this on Facebook, at least, and you can share our event or some of our advertising, that would be super helpful to let all our friends and neighbors know that Jazz in July is coming up for our very last night here. That'd be awesome. Otherwise, our usual stuff on Wednesday nights, 4 o'clock worship at Norris Square, 5 o'clock drive-through communion, 5:30 vacation Bible school, 6 o'clock circle time out in the backyard here. Come and be a part of those things on Wednesday nights. And a reminder also to please get registered for Seeds of Faith programming, confirmation programming this fall. All of that stuff is on our website under the youth tab. Lots of information there about what's coming up. And we'd love to have you get registered so that we can start being in contact with you about all of the things that are coming up. That'd be great. Other announcements?
And keep your eye out for the newsletter that'll show up shortly after that in the August edition. So
lots of information there too.
We have a new office manager. Our former office manager was with us for quite some time, 2.5 years, I think, and she's now going on to new adventures out in Colorado. And now our new office manager is driving the ship. So if you have any questions, it's still the same address, office@allsaintscg.org. And remember, you can also listen to the podcast and the sermons on Spotify, iTunes, and various other platforms in which you get your podcasts.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone.
Blessings all. Merry Christmas in July. We'll see you Sunday.
Merry Christmas.
Let's look out on the feast of Stephen, when the snow lay round about, deep and crisp and even. Brightly shone the moon that night, though the frost was cruel, when a poor man came in sight, gathering winter fuel. Hither, page, now stand by me, if thou know'st it telling, yonder peasant, who is he, where and what his dwelling? Sire, he lives a goodly hence underneath the mountain, right against the forest fence by St. Agnes fountain. Bring me flesh and bring me wine, bring me pine logs hither, now and I will see him dine, when we bear them thither. Page and monarch, forth they went together, through the ruins wild lament and the weary weather. Sire, the night is darker now, and the wind blows stronger, fails my heart, I know not how, I can go no longer. Mark my footsteps, good my page, tread thou in them boldly, thou shalt find the winter's rage freeze thy blood less coldly. In his master's steps he trod, where the snow lay dented. Each was in the very sod which the saint had printed. Therefore, Christians, all be sure, wealth or rank possessing, ye who now will bless the poor,